Hi everyone, so let's talk about manga manuscript papers. Manga genko yoshi. So genko means manuscript and yoshi means paper form or paper sheet. So let's take a look at what this paper actually looks like and I'll explain how to use it. Why do we specifically use this paper when we make manga? There's two reasons. One, it's very thick paper. It's a cardstock. Comic paper is a thicker paper. It's also called a smooth Bristol. It's very smooth to the touch. The reason why thick cardstock paper is important is because it holds ink well, right? So I ink with a G pen or a Micron pen, or I use my brushes on regular printer paper that will bleed through to the other side of the paper. This paper is thicker and it's more sturdy and your ink won't bleed through. So it's very important when you move to your inking phase that you're using this heavy paper. The other reason why manga manuscript paper is important is it has all of these blue lines here. So you might see all these numbers here. There's a line outside of here, line in the center, and then there's this sort of innermost dotted line. I'll explain what those mean and why they're important. It's specifically for Japanese printing standards. So the reason why you would want to use manga no genko yoshi is if you want to print manga in Japan. America has completely separate printing standards, so all of these numbers and these sizes don't really apply. Their printers are different. I personally like to use B4 size paper. It's very large. There's also A4, A5, and B5, but I prefer B4 size, which is pretty much the standard for a professional mangaka. So let's get into all of these blue things. So one, the reason why they're blue is this is a special non-photo blue, meaning once you do your pencils and then you ink over all of your pencils, you erase out your pencils and you scan this in black and white, only the black and white will remain and the non-photo blue will disappear. So none of this actually shows up in the final scan on the computer. That's why it's this specific blue. Now, all of these numbers on the outside, what are these for? These are to help you draw your panels. So if you can see here, there's a 5 and then there's a 5 here down below. They correspond, they're lined up exactly. So if I want to draw a straight line with my ruler, I can just line up the 5 and the 5 or the 6 and the 6 or whatever. And I can draw a nice straight line. All of these numbers around the paper are just guides, right? And there's numbers down here from 0 to 15 down, from 0 to 15 up. They all correspond to each other, so you can draw good straight lines with your panels or whatever you're drawing inside of your panels. Now, let's talk about these three sets of lines. The first line, the dotted lines that we see here, this is called the uchiwaku, or that translates into the innermost frame. This is where all of your important information goes when you draw. Usually when you're drawing your panels, all of your panels are across the uchiwaku line. And I'll explain why. So you want to use your uchiwaku to draw, it's the frame to draw your panels. And I'll explain why once I introduce the next line. The next line here is called the tachikiri-sen. This is where the printer cuts off the artwork, right? So you're drawing within the uchiwaku for the most part. Sometimes you draw outside up into the tachikiri-sen. But what it actually looks like when it's printed out in a book or a magazine, all of this is cut. So we only see to right here. So this is actually the frame that we're looking at when we're thinking about after it's printed. So you should expect anything that you draw to be cut at the tachikiri-sen. And it's okay to draw outside of it, but you just know that it's going to be cut. And this is why we have the uchiwaku. Anything that's important and all of the text you use in your word bubbles should be within this innermost frame, inside of the uchiwaku. Any important images and all text should be inside of the uchiwaku. It gets cut at the tachikiri-sen, and there's a design term called tension, right? When two elements are very close together, or when an element is really close to the edge of the paper, that creates tension. So you don't want anything, unless you want the eye to be drawn there, you don't want anything too close to the edge. That's why we want everything nice and centered inside of the uchiwaku. So we have that. We have the tachikiri-sen where everything gets cut. And then finally, this line here that have all the numbers, those corresponding numbers on it, is called the sotowaku, which just means outermost frame. Now, like I said, the tachikiri-sen is where the printer cuts off the image on the paper. but sometimes it's not always exactly on this line. But you will know somewhere between the tachikiri-sen and the sotowaku is where the artwork is going to get cut. Now I'll show you some pencil manuscript drafts that I've done to serve as examples. So here, as you can see here, this is a completed manuscript draft. All of the important information is inside of this uchiwaku, and all of the frames have been drawn along the edges of the uchiwaku. It's a really important reference line to show you where to put your frames, right? Now, I did draw a little tiny bit outside of here, but it doesn't even reach the tachikiri-sen. So I know it's gonna get cut there, and that's still gonna be inside of the page. But absolutely, I wanna make sure my text, and all of the important information that I really want my audience to see is gonna be within the innermost frame. Same goes here, right? Most important image, all of the important stuff is inside of the uchiwaku. Now, as you can see here, I drew way outside the uchiwaku into the tachikiri-sen. This isn't necessarily important. This isn't, the top of this helmet of this character isn't necessarily something that I wanted the audience to see, but I always believe it's important to complete the drawing and draw all the way through so you get the proportions right. So I really drew that for myself, knowing that this is gonna get cut, okay? Same goes here. Here's another example where I kept everything inside of the uchiwaku, but this sort of extends beyond all the way to the edge of the paper. I just drew that so I could complete the drawing. I know it's gonna get cut here, and none of this is important information. Now, once again, drawing past borders, I didn't even draw the frame inside of the uchiwaku, but I did make sure here that all of the important information stays within that frame. I know all of this is gonna get cut. I wanted to draw the entire arm to make sure I was drawing the arm proportionally correct, right? This hand comes out past the uchiwaku, but much before the tachikiri-sen, so I know the fingers aren't gonna get cut off in a weird area or anything. Now, sometimes when you draw a panel, so like as you can see, these panels here, they're all neatly organized across this uchiwaku, across this innermost frame. Sometimes if you look at other comics or manga, you notice that panels extend sort of beyond that border, even off of the page. Now, there is a strategy to do that. Because you're not quite sure exactly where it's gonna get cut, somewhere maybe within a millimeter or so, around the tachikiri-sen, you don't want to draw, if you want to draw a frame outside, for example, you don't want to draw it vertically across this tachikiri-sen, because what if it gets cut at like a weird angle and then it's like kind of there, kind of not there, or if it's right on the edge of the paper and that's bringing a lot of tension and drawing the eye to something that's not important. In that case, which is an example I drew here, this panel extends all the way across. So you just draw it all the way across and you don't cut it. Knowing all of this is going to get cut, but because we don't know exactly where it's going to get cut during printing, we just finish the horizontal line all the way across. The same goes if you were drawing a frame with a vertical line down, you just extend it all the way to the bottom of the page just in case. So that's essentially how you use manga manuscript paper. We have the uchiwaku, the innermost frame. We have the tachikiri-sen, which is roughly where the printer cuts it. And we have the sotowaku, the outermost frame that has all of these corresponding numbers that help us create frames. And that's how you use manga paper.